the victims reached over 200, I think.
Oh my gosh.
Yes,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I watched news that there is one boy survived in 3 days under the ruins.
That's right. I saw that. I read about that for 3 days.
Yes.
Oh, God bless him. God was looking after him, I think there.
He's a very strong boy. Well, his mother and his grandmother passed away beside him. Oh, that's really, it's really sad.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can start now, shall we? Okay.
If that's okay. Yes, no problem.
Yes. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, the participants of Qualitative Research for Researcher guest lecture today. Thank you for Dr. Aisling for your coming. And this is our last sessions for our series of guest lecture. Oh, this is, time flies. Aisling, actually, I really enjoy the lecture. It seems like I have my own, my doctorate degree again. This is like refreshing.
Oh, very good. It's lovely. It's lovely to see you, Ben. It really is. It really is.
Yeah. Okay, so today, guys, we are going to continue what we have discussed before. So it's about analysis of qualitative data, right? And then the second one is qualitative research publications. Okay, I think we can start now. Dr. Aisling, time is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome again to this, our last session. We will indeed be starting where we left off last week, looking at qualitative research. Just to remind everybody, if you have a question you want to ask, feel free to put it in the chat or feel free to put your hand up. And as always, the slides will be sent in a PDF format for you to use. And I'm happy, I know this is our last session, but if you have any remaining questions at the end of our session, I'm really happy for you to contact me if you have any other questions. Okay, brilliant. Okay. Oops. There we go. Okay, great. Okay, so you'll be familiar. So we've spent quite a lot of time looking at what qualitative research is, how we define qualitative research. Last week, we looked at a number of different methods, and we looked at the approaches that those methods are derived from, and we discussed quite a lot about the positives, the pros and cons, the advantages and the disadvantages of particular types of methods. And along the way, we looked at a number of different examples. So we chatted a lot last week, which I was really thankful for, really thankful for. So we've got a little bit of catch up to do, but I thought I'd take this opportunity to just be more elaborate around what doing qualitative research looks like. And so towards the end of our session today, we'll have a look at some of the ways in which qualitative research publications and articles, the way that they're structured, and say a little bit about how that can help us both in reading and understanding articles, but also in producing articles for publication. Okay, brilliant. Right. Do we remember where we left off? I'm hoping you're all nodding. I hope so. Well, okay.
That analysis, right?
That's it. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Verily. Thank you very much. So we left off last week looking at analyzing data and data analysis. Okay, we were talking about interviews and we talked about different stages, if you like, different steps of conducting interviews. We had talked quickly towards the end about the transcription of interviews, and just to point that out again, that transcription, many people would say analysis starts at transcription. So how you transcribe an interview or how you transcribe spoken data into written data has an effect on what it is, or has an influence on how you can go ahead and analyze. Just to give you a very brief example of what that means, in some ways of transcribing data, there will be no, if you like, contextual information. There'll be no information about if a teacher's nodding or if their face is going, or if they are shrugging their shoulders. Whereas, and if you miss that kind of information, it can have an effect on your understanding of the written transcript. Okay, so you can miss things out. If you don't transcribe things, they are then missing in your analysis. Okay, there may be times then you want to transcribe, but actually any bodily movements, any facial expressions, they perhaps aren't going to be relevant for your work, for your research questions. And in that case, you could make a choice that you wouldn't be transcribing those particular gestures or facial expressions. And we'll have a look in a few examples here about how they have been transcribed. Normally, you'll see them set apart, so in brackets. There's some information, some contextual information about what is happening at the time that the person is speaking. Okay, and so for our analysis. So we've got lots and lots of textual data if we were talking about interviews that have been transcribed, talking about classroom interactions that have been recorded and transcribed. We're working with quite a lot of textual data. So let's have a look then at how we can go about analysing, how we can go about verifying, if you like, and looking at some of the processes and steps that are involved in that. As always, as you maybe know by now, I like things beginning with a story. And we know our very first encounter, we saw the science teacher. Okay. You will be familiar with this particular paper that I'm presenting in front of you. I think. Sorry. No, this is a new paper. Sorry, I haven't shown you this. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I haven't shown you this. But what this research article is about, and you can see it's from the Journal of Science Teacher Education. It was published in 2001, issue 2, page 417. Okay, so the details are there for you. It was published, the title is this, and the author is this. Okay, you can see from this information as well that this journal is associated with a particular area of the world and a particular professional association. And so it is the Alliance for Science Teacher Education in the USA. Okay, I think that's always really important to bear in mind when you're looking at articles and you're reading them and understanding them, looking at what kind of article this is. Is this a very high-ranked journal publication in a very well-known journal, an international journal? Is it an article that's associated with a particular professional association? That's always really useful to bear in mind, okay? And we talk a little bit later about what that is. Okay, so thinking about what's the story here. Okay, so this particular researcher was interested in science teachers' beliefs about assessment. Okay, so their beliefs about assessment. Part of what the researcher was looking at was chemistry, high school chemistry teachers. So I hope that's familiar to you. And the researcher wanted to know what do and how do teachers assess through a lab report, okay, through a chemistry lab report. All right. And I hope in your mind you're thinking about all of the things that you want to achieve through students doing lab reports. And so one of the experiments, or one of some of the topics that they were looking at, was metal reactivity. And I'm really hoping that you know what that is, because I don't. Okay. No, I again, I went to my friend Google and I looked for an image of metal reactivity, and I hope that looks familiar to you, or is at least slightly accurate. Okay. All right. Please let me know if it's not. So the topic was classroom assessment practices of a science teacher. Okay. You can see from this abstract that how many participants are involved? It's just one. Okay. I know that last week we were talking about how many participants is needed. What can you produce a publication based on one case study or one individual interview? Well, this is an example I want to show you where there's one high school chemistry teacher is the focus of this research. Okay. And so the researcher was interested in this teacher's classroom assessment practices. Okay. And we can tell from the abstract that it's a female teacher. So what were her practices? So the research questions that this researcher was investigating was, how does the science teacher support student learning during a particular unit and assess student learning during a particular assessment event? So what they're talking about as the assessment event here is the lab report. Okay. To what extent do components of our assessment practices align with each other? Okay, so we talked a little bit about different types of assessment practices. We talked about observing people, we talked about testing people, and we talked about asking people questions. So those are different types of assessment practices. Another question, to what extent do her learning and assessment beliefs explain her assessment practices? That was also one of the things that we mentioned last week as an example of how it's always important to get, if possible, different data sources to put together. So we mentioned last week that we could ask teachers, how do you assess in your classrooms? How do you answer teachers' questions? How do you answer students' questions? And teachers can give us a list of things. I do this, I do this. But when we go and observe teachers, they may do very different things to what they say they do. So it's a difference between perceptions and practices. Okay. And often in qualitative research, we want to explore the complexity of that, of exploring, why do people think they do some things, but in reality, they do different things. Okay. So what do you think methods were here? So you've done quite a lot of work now on different research methods in qualitative research. So I'm asking you if you want to come along and let me know, what methods do you think were used in this particular study? So the researcher wanted to explore the teacher's classroom assessment practices. So what do you think the researcher did? What methods did they choose?
Document analysis.
Document analysis could be, yep. So that's one. What kind of documents would they be?
The student assessment.
Yeah.
Classroom assessment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking at the test, looking at the lab reports.
Oh,
so the lab reports that the students, yeah. If they wanted to find out about beliefs, what would they have done? What would the researcher have done?
Oke, Ibu Asling bertanya, jika misalnya guru di sini ingin meneliti tentang belief, rasa percaya atau belief itu ya kepercayaan, menurut dia tuh seperti apa gitu dalam mengajar. Kira-kira persepsi guru dalam mengajar itu kira-kira pakai apalah untuk mengambil datanya, apakah wawancara atau apa? Siapa yang bisa jawab untuk melihat persepsi guru dalam mengajar? Ada yang bisa jawab mungkin? Bagaimana cara mengambil data? Ya, silakan Bu Erlina. Bu Erlina, please.
Sorry, I turned off my camera. The questionnaire, yeah, I think by using the instrument, the questionnaire for our observation in the classroom. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Absolutely. So classroom observation and questionnaires indeed. And that is exactly what happened in this particular study. So, excuse me. There was an initial background teacher questionnaire. There was a semi-structured teacher interview. So remember, when we want to find out what people think about things, one way that we can do that is through interviews. Okay, observation, you're absolutely right. Observation was there. A student assessment questionnaire, more semi-structured interviews, and this time with students. Okay, the lab reports, as you said, Vinny, the document analysis, the lab reports, and then another semi-structured interview with the teacher. So you can see here that although focuses on one teacher, there are lots of data sources that the researcher gathers up in order to help them better understand and to answer their research question. Okay, so we've got a list of methods here, and that is not uncommon. That is fairly typical in qualitative research. If there is a, for example, smaller number of participants, then we tend to see that the number and the amount of data sources increases. There tends to be different types of qualities to draw upon from different data sources. And I hope that's helpful, because that's something that we had talked about before, about how many interviews is enough. Well, there's no straightforward answer, but not when we have this one teacher, a smaller number of participants, it tends to be discussed within a number of different data sources. Okay, right. One of the things, just following on from last week, we talked about semi-structured interviews. Differences between semi-structured interviews and structured interviews. What would that be? Anyone?
Ada yang tahu perbedaan semi-structure dengan structure interview yang semi-terstruktur dan terstruktur? That's the Indonesian word.
That's what it is. Okay, brilliant. Happy day.
Similar, itu similar to English. Ada yang bisa jawab? Mungkin Bapak Ibu silakan, adik-adik. Apa bedanya semi-structure, semi-terstruktur dan terstruktur dalam interview? Come on.
No. It's okay. It's not a test. It's not a test. It's not a test. I suppose.
Maybe yes. Maybe it is not warm yet. Warm up yet.
Yeah, could be. It's late in the afternoon. People. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bu Ira, please.
Maybe with a structure interview, we have the question. The question itu sudah pasti gitu ditetapkan terlebih dahulu. Tapi kalau semi structure ada pertanyaan yang sudah ditetapkan, kemudian nanti bisa berkembang menjadi pertanyaan-pertanyaan lanjutan bergantung pada informannya gitu.
Okay, Ibu Ira answers that the structure interview means that the questions has been set out in advance, while semi-structure interview means that it can be developed depending on the response from the informant. So the question might appear during the conversations.
Yes, and thank you very much. Dr. Ira. That's absolutely, yes, that's it exactly. So structured interviews tend to be carried out when there are lots of people to interview about the same things. So you want to try to keep some consistency. A semi-structured is more often used when there are smaller numbers of participants because you're interested in the individual experiences. So there's more flexibility. Okay. In any case of structured or semi-structured, questions are normally presented in documentation for report or for submission to ethics committees, etc., like this. So I have taken a screenshot here. So in this orange box, these are exactly the interview questions that were asked in this project, looking at semi-structured interview, gathering self-reported beliefs about how students learn, okay, in the science class. So these are the examples, these are the interview questions that the researcher used on this project. When we think about qualitative research papers, it is increasingly required for different publications that you will submit your research instruments at the same time as you submit your research paper. Often it's about wide access, free access, and so that people can reuse, obviously citing your reference or whatever. But it's a way of being able to share instruments, and also that always leads to something good. So it's either these instruments are used again in a different context, and they can actually be seen to be very good instruments. Or indeed, the opposite could also happen, that these instruments will only be useful for a particular context. And that also is very important to have that understanding. Okay, so when you're thinking about developing your interview questions, you can see things like this. So specifying the project. While this project focuses primarily on assessment, I first would like your thoughts about how students effectively learned science. So keeping questions very open. And again, that is a very strong feature of qualitative research, particularly around semi-structured ones, as semi-structured interviews. Okay, so those are the questions. Okay, so going back to our steps in the development of interviews. So thematizing, so that was one of our very first things. If you have a look, remember that diagram. So thematizing, so it was the themes of assessment. Okay, designing was semi-structured or structured interview, and then the interview itself composed of how many questions. You can see here 9 questions. That's a good number. It's not too many, it's not too little. Okay. Transcribing, we'll see that in a moment, and looking at then the analysis. Okay, so we'll have a look here at what the we'll have a look here at what the researcher, how the researcher describes the process of the interview. So this extract here, I hope you can see here, this is taken from the article, and I want to show it to you as a way of how to report on your qualitative research. So one of the things that you'll notice here is the use of the first person pronoun. I began collecting data by providing Miss Taylor with background questionnaire approximately 6 weeks before the assessment event. 1 week later, I conducted the semi-structured interview. Okay, so this is part of what is included in the manuscript in the publication. Often this raises questions about, can I use the first person can I use I in a research article? And certainly in relation to qualitative research conducted within a social sciences framework, it is more often acceptable than it is not acceptable in other spheres. Okay, so I know perhaps, and please, Dr. Era, correct me if I am wrong, writing a chemistry report, writing a chemistry publication, that may not be the use of the first person, or I did this or I did that, might not be the preferred way of expressing what happened. However, in a context such as this, where you're dealing with qualitative research, where you are the researcher, where it is within education, in the field of social sciences, that is much more an accepted manner of communicating what happened in the processes of research. So that's kind of important to very often the I is used as a statement of facts. I began, I started, I conducted, thinking about the verbs that are used. Certainly in research papers, you would tend to be stepping away from things that were much more of feeling. So I believe, or I think. So we wouldn't be using those particular verbs. We would be using more concrete verbs to report stated facts. I did this, I conducted this, I reviewed, we reviewed. Okay, so that is really important to point out as well. Okay, so how did the researcher report on how they analysed? Okay, and I want to show you this. This is a research paper published in the Journal of Science Education to find out how the researcher analysed all of the data. There is only this amount of information. Okay, all right. So when you go and look at this paper, and I would encourage you to look at that paper, you can see, how did the researcher analyze? We've got four paragraphs. This is it. This is how the methods is described in relation to the analysis of qualitative data. Now, I'm not suggesting this is always a good idea. This is clearly successful. It's got published and it's clear. I can follow it. I would always be a little cautious that this is a little thin. There's not very much detail here. And I think it's always better to give more detail on what you did and then take it out later. Okay. If you submit an article and one of the criticisms or reviews is that reduce the amount of information, well, that's very good. That's good. Okay. I think it's always better provide more information about what you did and how you did it, because it can always be taken away again. This, I think, is a little light. It's a little thin. Okay. So if we look at what it is that they reported, so I analysed, so there's our I again, I analysed Ms. Taylor's assessment beliefs and practices through systematic coding, recoding, and pattern recognition. Okay. Now, systematic coding, recoding, and pattern recognition, those are very common terms that are used in the analysis and reporting on the analysis of qualitative research. I want to just point out some, I will go back and I'm sorry for moving slides, but I just want to highlight these three aspects here. So systematic coding, recoding, and pattern recognition. Okay. Coding, I've given a very basic description here. Coding is the ascription of a category label to a piece of data. Okay. Very broadly speaking, if your teacher is talking about, in this case, for example, if they're talking about how do science students learn, and they say something like, oh, well, I think they learn best through problem solving. Okay. Then, oh, hello. Okay, hello. Oh, thought that was a bit exciting there. So when we were, so if that's something that the teacher has said, so you read that and you think, what is that about? It's about problem solving. And so what you can do is you can label, highlight, put in a box, choose whatever way that you want to do it, and you label it and you attach a code to it. And you can say that piece is about problem solving. So the teacher thinks, I want to know what the teacher thinks about problem solving. So then you code, you color in, you box off, whatever way that you prefer, all of the instances where the teacher talks about problem solving. Okay, so in that case, you've got lots of examples of where the teacher talks about problem solving, and problem solving is one of your codes. Now, codes can be defined before you look at your data. Okay, they can be based on the themes, they can be based on the research questions, or sorry, they can be based on the concepts, and they can be based on the research questions, the things that you're looking for. Okay, so they can be designed in advance, they can be listed in advance. And that, I think that's really helpful to remember. Sometimes people think, oh, I just get the data and the analysis just happens. It doesn't. Okay, it doesn't just happen. You can think about and you prepare how you are going to analyze your data. And so you can have a set of codes. You could have a set of 10, 20 codes that are specifically related to the concepts, to the ideas, to the notions that you are interested in. And therefore, when you've got your transcript, you go through that transcript and you say, ah, that piece is about problem solving. Oh, that piece is about students working together. Oh, that piece is about tests. Okay, so then you build up examples in each of your codes. Okay, so that in a very sort of basic way, that is what coding is about. It isn't any more sophisticated than that, I have to say. Okay, there is no big secret to be revealed in qualitative analysis. That is pretty much what you have to do. You have to read the data that you have. You have to interpret the data that you have relevant to your research questions, relevant to your literature review. Okay, but we can do that in systematic ways. So one way that we can do it is we can develop a list of codes before we go near the data. Okay, very often when that does happen, we have a list, I don't know, let's say a list of 10 codes, just for example, a list of 10 codes. We then look at the data that we have and we think, I don't have any of those codes in this particular data. Now, that might mean that there's something slightly wrong with what you have with your codes. It might be that the name of your code is a bit wrong and you can't apply that code name to a particular piece of your data. Okay, and in that instance, we can do what's called recoding. Okay, so you have, if you like, version 1 of your codes. You've looked at the data, you've reviewed it, and you think, actually, I don't think these codes are going to be helpful. And you recode. So it might be, instead of problem solving, you might want to think about student problem solving. Okay, so you might make it more specific. Okay, that's one example of recoding. All right. Another example might be if you have a code about collaborative group work, for example, but you might want to break that down into pair work. You might want to break that down into all girls groups, all boys groups. So you might want to break your codes down a little bit. And some codes you might think, I didn't find any examples there. So you might think, oh, that's quite useful to know. Either I have anticipated a concept being there and it's not there, or there's something that I perhaps need to change. Okay, so that really is what the coding is about. It's about taking a piece of data and ascribing, giving some category, giving some label to that data. Okay, and so that's easier to work with codes, in summarizing data, in looking at connections between data, than it is with long stretches of transcripts. Okay, now you'll see here pattern recognition. Okay, pattern recognition is where, as the researcher, you're working through these codes and you begin to see, oh, that's happening again. That's a pattern. So pattern is really about looking at where things repeat, where things perhaps don't repeat instantly, but repeat in some other context. So recognizing patterns. So you're always keeping your thinking about if you can make connections. Okay, and patterns are about recognizing connections. So it can be a matter of, say, for example, frequency, for example. So one particular code is very dominant. It appears a lot. And so you think, wow, that appears a lot. There must be something about this particular code, or there must be something about this concept that I'm trying to access with this code. So that's one way of recognizing a pattern. A pattern could be, this is a very dominant category. Another pattern might be where if you have 2 or 3 teachers and you notice, actually, this pattern is very common in one teacher, but not so common in another. And that's another area that you can then go and investigate. Okay, so coding, I just want to coding is really about taking your piece of data and being able to attach a label to it, a category to it, which is going to help you to process lots of data and process that data into something meaningful to answer your research question. Okay, so in this example, all we have here is the systematic coding, the recoding, and the pattern recognition. Okay. And the example here, this is a bit blurry, I do apologize, but this is just an example here of where the researcher had 2 codes, problem solving and collaborative group work. They had a description of the code, and then they had an example of the code. And so this example of the code was taken from the pre-assessment interview. So this was a transcript of the interview with the teacher. Whoops, sorry. This example of an interview with the teacher. This other code on collaborative group work, a description. This was taken from the assessment questionnaire. Okay, so you can see that codes can be used with different data sources. All right, the same codes could be used with different data sources. All right, and that's totally acceptable as well. Okay, all right. So this is an example here. So about where the researcher has moved to focus on a certain number of codes. Okay, and that is, again, you can think about, and very often and I'll apologize in advance for using a chemistry metaphor or a science metaphor. It's very much like a funnel. Where you've got all of this data, but you have to filter out what is helpful and going to answer your research questions. So you begin with lots and lots of data, and you have to reduce and reduce and reduce. Okay, I don't know if a funnel was a good explanation there, but we leave that there. In this example from this paper, the researcher decided that the beliefs of, there was 2 codes that were most important for them to be able to answer meaningfully the questions set. And they decided that they were going to focus on just 2 codes, the collaborative group work and the problem solving. And the reason for this is that they're frequent. So they appeared more frequently compared to other beliefs. Okay. The reason that I'm pointing this out is that this gives you some indication of the researcher's analytical processes. And that's really important for the writing up of papers and publications, that you show what your research process has been. Okay, so even though it's just 1 sentence, and I would like more than 1 sentence here, there is an indication of the rationale for the decisions that the researcher made. Okay, that is very often what we talk about in qualitative research is rigor and transparency. Normally in quantitative research, it's things like reliability and validity. Okay, now, but you can see that referred to in qualitative research. That's a discussion for a whole other day. But thinking about us dealing with qualitative research, we want this to be rigorous, meaning that it's really clear we have investigated as well as possible the data that we have. Transparent is that if we give enough information so that any other researcher can look at what we have done, and if they want to, they can replicate it. We're not going to say that they'll get the same results. That's not what we're saying, but we're saying that we are being rigorous, that we are really analyzing data in depth, and we are being transparent. We are showing clearly what it is and why we did what we did. Okay, and so those are really important things to bear in mind. Okay, so moving with this example, I want to show you here where if you like, the researcher moved from analyzing the data to coding the data, looking at what was making decisions about recoding, identifying patterns in the data, and then looking to connect that data and that review of data with research questions, with the literature. Okay, and so what often happens is you get papers presenting, I collected research, I analyzed the data, and here the following 3 themes emerged, or the following 4 things are important. Okay, and that is usually, typically, how qualitative research is reported. Okay, here from the coding, the recoding, and the pattern findings and the pattern recognition, the researcher is presenting these in relation to how the assessment practices are aligned or they're not aligned. Okay, and so what they are, if you have a read at this, so after reviewing the data, so these are the sorts of phrases that are used in qualitative research papers. After reviewing the data, 3 types of alignment emerged. Now, I want to you will very often see this in qualitative research papers about themes emerging. Very often that is understood to mean that these themes didn't exist before the researcher looked at the data. So the themes came out of the process of data analysis. Okay, so if you like, I like to think about themes as what is the meaningful output of my analysis? Okay, what does this tell me about my investigation? What does it tell me about my research question? All right, so, and we'll see here it's called types of alignment. So if you recall, I just want to take you back slightly. If you recall, the paper was about beliefs, practices, and reflection. Okay, so beliefs, practice, and reflection. And here, the assignment, the alignment of assessment practices for each of these particular codes are relating to those. Okay, so the beliefs, the practices, and the reflections. Okay, so here, when it's here, it's stated as cognition, observation, and interpretation. Okay, and the researcher is looking at ways in which these three aspects, the beliefs, I've forgotten what they are, the beliefs, the practices, and the reflections, which are named here as cognition, interpretation, and observation. Okay, whether or not they align with each other. So is the belief, the practice, and observation, are they all aligned? Okay, and so here there are examples of where there is alignment or direct alignment. Okay, and where the evidence of learning belief is followed all the way through. So it's the same. So the belief is aligned to the practice and aligned to the reflection. So they match. Alignment is just about matching. Okay, then here there is an example of where it isn't aligned. And so that is how the researcher is using the particular codes to say something about the theoretical constructs that they have sought to look at. Okay. All right. And they're using problem solving as one example and collaborative group work, the two main codes that they were looking at, to help them to build up a picture and to answer the research questions about what are this teacher's beliefs, practices, and reflections, and do they match in the context of a lab report assessment. Okay, now the other reason for showing you this is that in the reporting of qualitative research, it is often the case where themes make their way into some sort of a diagram. Okay, a diagram helps to show the connections between the codes, between the themes that you have looked at, and some of your meanings that you want to help the reader to understand. So diagrams, if you think about in quantitative research, very often you've got your tables, you've got your statistics. Sometimes it can be helpful in qualitative research to summarize some of your understandings in a diagram like this. Okay, right. Oops. Okay, sorry, going backwards here. Oops. Yeah, okay. Just to show you how the comparison of data sources, how the multiple data sources are also used. Not only do we have these codes presented, not only do we have a diagram of how the codes relate to one another, but we've also got extracts from the interviews themselves. Okay, so here, this part here is taken directly from one of directly from the research paper, and what it wants to do is to show Miss Tyler, so the science teachers, she wants to describe her reflection, wants to present her reflection. Okay, and so very typically you have these extracts presented, all right, of the interviews. So this is taken directly from the interview. So again, if you think about how does one present qualitative data, how does one present the analysis of qualitative data, it is very often either in, here's a diagram about my themes, about my codes, here is some extracts from the data. So that's often how we do this presentation. We present this particular type of how we present qualitative research. One thing I have to say, again, I think there are reasons for choosing papers that are good examples and maybe not so good examples, is here it says interview. Okay. I think it's always a better idea to give some additional information. after this interview, what interview, when was the interview conducted, who was the interview conducted with, and sometimes labeling the data source can be very helpful. It's particularly helpful whenever you have quite a number of data sources and you want to present different types of data. So although it says up here in the text, for example, during the post-observation interview, Ms. Tyler noted, and this is from Ms. Tyler interview, a better representation of this would be the post-observation interview, okay, rather than just interview. Again, that's the kind of detail that would be helpful in papers, preparation for papers. That's very useful to do that. Okay, right. Just before, that was quite, I realized I've talked quite a lot there, so I'm going to stop. And are there any questions about that? Or I've talked quite a lot there, and I'm sorry about that. That's not good.
Ada yang ingin bertanya? Silakan Bapak Ibu atau mahasiswa. I do have a question actually, Ibu Aisley. In terms of coding, you said before that when we code, we can use the concept as a guide for us to classify them, okay, right? By using the concept. While we know that the theory of the concept itself, from one researcher to another researcher, different sometimes, they are complementary. So my question is now, can we use several definitions of concept as a guide for me to analyze the code? And should I mention that in my methodology?
Yes is the short answer there. Yes, definitely. And I think that's really interesting because say, for example, one project I've been involved in recently, when we were looking at, how people talk about gender. And so there were lots and lots of different ways of being able to do that. And that was exactly what we looked at. So we coded things whenever people were talking about gender. But within that code, we looked and said, right, well, here's one person's talking about male and female. Here's another person talking about different types of genders. So yes, absolutely. Yes, you can. Whatever's going to help you best with your research question. Do you include that in your methods? My view is yes, you do. If only, and it may be that when it comes time for publication, that a reviewer would say there's too much detail, or it's too long, or it's not necessary. That's okay, because you can take it out. You would never, I could not see a situation where a paper would be rejected because you've got too much data, too much information on your methods. That would not be a call. I don't think that would be a good review. If that wouldn't be a reason why something would be rejected. That certainly might be something that would be a revision if that was required, but it certainly would not at all get you rejected. And I think it just helps with the relationship between the writer and the reader to fully understand how you did what you did. And I think sometimes that's more important in qualitative research than it is in quantitative research, because there's kind of an assumption, I did this test and I did that test.
Yes,
Whereas it's non-negotiable really in some ways. Whereas how an individual can approach an analysis, it can vary. There can be variability in that, and therefore I think the clearer, the more transparent that we can make that, then we can look and say, actually, this person's really rigorous, in what they do. So yes and yes to both questions.
One more. Thank you so much for your answers. That's really enlightening. This is the second one. This is very new for me, what you just mentioned. In the slides here, you said that 3 types of alignment: direct, conflicting, and scarce. You mean that the direct one is our finding, while the conflicting and scarce, we don't take it in our finding?
So that's really, really interesting. All of these are findings. Okay.
Really? So we have to put that in our finding, and we classify that into 3 like this?
Well, this is only an example. This is only an example. I'm not telling you this is what you would do with every single. This is an example that comes from a paper that was looking at assessment practices in science classrooms. Okay.
Okay. Depend on
All
the
right.
data.
So,
Yes.
so no, but your point is a really good one. It is a really good. It's a really good point, Fanny, because it can be just the absence of something can be just as important as the
Yeah.
presence of something. Absolutely. And if something conflicts, that's really important. It's really important to investigate that. So this example only comes from that paper, and it's about that assessment. But your further point about if something doesn't fit in a code,
Yes.
or what do I
Yeah.
do with it?
Yeah,
Well,
that's true. I mean, it's beyond and based on it's beyond the guide that we use. It is not mentioned in the guides. Well, in the data we got that. So what should we do with that further?
Oh, brilliant. Oh, I love this. Benny, I love your questions. They're really good. They're always really good. So what should you do? You look at it, and if you were coding, for example, and you're thinking, oh, there's something, and it doesn't fit with one of my codes, well, make a new code, right?
Is it
Make
possible?
Yes.
Okay.
You make a new code. Now, sometimes what happens, what researchers do is that you've maybe got a list of 10 codes, and then you read something, you go, that's really interesting. Doesn't fit with one of those codes. And they sometimes have like an other code, right? And so they put a piece of data in this other code, right? Then you look at what's inside the other box. And what you might find inside those other boxes are maybe the emergence of 2 or 3 or 4 different new codes. And so that's, if you like, I think it's always a balance between a kind of a very deductive approach and saying, here are my 10 codes, and I'm going to code all this data in these 10 codes, versus I didn't know that, coming from the data. So the data speaks to you. And that's where they talk about emerging, is it coming out of? I always think it's a bit strange to say it in that way, but what it really is, and that example, Venny, is a really good one. It's where you've got this other, but actually you might find that's where some of the most interesting stuff is, because you haven't thought about it before. Okay. You haven't thought about it. And then therefore, that's really important. It's really important that you look at that. So yes, if something doesn't fit, it means two things. It means your codes need to change, or there's something brand new happening. And it could be either of those things, and it could potentially be both as well. But it's always really important. If it doesn't fit in your code it as other, then look at all of the examples that are in your other and see if there's any patterns there. See what else is happening that's not happening, being captured by these other codes. And you might find that in your other box, you then make 2 or 3 codes from that. Really important, because that's kind of how our new understandings appear. That's how sometimes we find out things that we never knew and we need to know.
So although it is not in line with the previous research, so it's just like I invent something with my data.
Absolutely. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's really important.
Okay, I got it. Thank you,
Ibu Aisling. Thank you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talking about the coding, I think that you mentioned, because you need to do the recording. You have to. I did my research, my thesis in qualitative approach, but yeah, it's a little bit hard to, when we have to to analyze the data, to make the codes or something. It's quite a difficult one. And I remember that when I did that, I have to do it to recording like 3 times. So the first one, and then the second one, and then while I analyzed the data, I just realized that this code not fit to the what I the code that I have before. So, but in terms to do that, we have to, change the framework, the theoretical framework, or what do you think? It's sometimes it's hard to find we have to read more and we have to find the because it's not aligned with the previous research. So is that really have to do that? We have to find a new theoretical framework, or so that's the first question. And then the second one, I think, is how many times should we have to do this recording? Because in qualitative, we know that we have to do that again and again because we have to see all the data, and then we have to find the codes. And is there any ideal number that we have to do it in 2 or 3 times? Or based on your experience? Thank you.
Thank you very much. They are brilliant questions. Thank you very, very much. Erlina, is it Erlina? Thank you so much. Really, really excellent questions. The first, I'll answer the second one first, if you like. So how many times is it enough to go through data? You will not be surprised for me to say that there is no number. However, often when we talk about research, it's always more than one. That's the first thing. It's always multiple times. That's I know if you're thinking about quantitative research, you might think, well, I've done that test and it's done and it's finished and off it goes. Well, it's not. It doesn't really work like that. We need to read because we need to read and to interpret what's going on. That's why we ourselves, our bodies, our minds, we become part of the tool of analysis. It's not the test itself, it's not the statistical test, it's us, it's our interpretations of what's happening. It's what we know about the particular theoretical perspective that we've been holding on to, or the previous research. All of those things are brought into the interpretation. They help us to code. All of that knowledge helps us to code and to conduct. So how many times? It's always multiple, right? So how many times is enough? Well, there is something that in the research methods literature, people talk about as a saturation point. And the saturation point is really where you feel that, and again, you can see I'm feeling this is quality, where you feel that you've looked at the data and you can't see anything more in it, that you can't see anything new in it, that you feel that you have, you've soaked up. If you think about, a tissue and the water, you've soaked up enough and the tissue is kind of full and there's no more water left. It's that, and that's what they talk about, saturation point. I realize I'm talking to chemists about saturation, so I'll just stop there. But that's the phrase that's often used is saturation point. It's where you feel that you're reading through this data, you're reading through the codes, you've recoded, you've identified patterns, you've maybe organized your codes into particular themes, and you're reviewing that and you're thinking, yeah, I'm not seeing anything new that would change any of my codes again, or I'm not seeing anything new that would make me produce a new theme. So that's the answer to the second question. It's always multiple times. So it's not, and we wouldn't be talking about 1 or 2. I can't put a number on it, but just, from my own experience, I'd be reading and rereading and reading and rereading many, many times. And there is, of course, it depends on the kind of research as well. Often if it's fairly short-term research, the amount of time that you actually have to read is much reduced. Whereas if it's a longer piece of research, you maybe have time to go back. So you kind of have almost not a historical view, but you've got some time where you've got maybe fresh eyes to go back and to look on it again. But that very much depends on the kind of research project. That sometimes there is the luxury of that, sometimes there isn't the luxury of that. So that's answering your second question, I hope, if that's all right. I see you're smiling, Erlina, so I'm taking that as a yes. Okay, your first question, again, these are such good questions. What happens if I find something that doesn't match onto the theory, or that my theoretical perspective doesn't help me understand what it is that I've got? Now, another word that they talk about in qualitative research is an iterative process. And what that means is, rather than it being a linear process where you go from A to B to C to D in a line, it's much rather a bit of a cycle or a spiral, okay, where you have to go back and to re-examine your concepts, to re-examine some of your understandings or the understandings presented. And to be honest, that's really positive. That is a positive thing. So one shouldn't be worried about, oh no, my research doesn't fit with what's, what that tends to suggest is sort of a couple of things. One is that this is going to give us some new insight into looking at an old problem in a different way. So that's really positive. But also it can be where you have to then increase the amount of literature that you're engaging with, or that you have to combine previous separate groups of literature. Okay, so that could be where your research maybe crosses over into a slightly different but related area. And so that, again, that's very good, because that's about originality sometimes, where you can combine two perhaps slightly different concepts or theoretical perspectives, or you're combining gender and language teaching rather than looking at them separately. You're being able to combine different sources, and that's not a problem. It's not a problem to go back to your literature review. In the examples of the papers that we have here, there is no way that finished publication was written linearly. Never it couldn't happen. It wouldn't have happened. It would have been a draft literature review. The research would have been conducted, it would have been written up, and then it would have been, does the literature review match what my findings are? Actually, there are some gaps, so then I would go back and to fill them in. All right, so that's a relatively normal process. It doesn't mean that, oh my goodness, I've missed a whole set of information in my literature review. But of course, it's always important to check that as well. It's always important. We're all human beings, and we can overlook things, and we can miss out a very significant body of research that we maybe haven't looked at before. And it's good that we've managed to catch that before we go on. So I hope, does that answer your question, Arlene, or at least give an answer to your question?
Thank you for your answer. I think you have already answered all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you
Do
very
I
much.
sling? My
Yes.
apology. I think Joe just raised his hand. Joe,
Sorry. Yes.
Are you going to ask something?
Yes. Thank you, Penny. Hi, Aisling.
Hello there.
It's really interesting when we discuss about qualitative research. I have a question about inter-rater reliability when we are coding. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Okay. So inter-rater reliability is where you have more than one person using the same codes on the same data. Okay. And very often it's considered a measure of rigor. I know it's called inter-rater reliability, and it's using sort of more quantitative discourse to talk about reliability. In a very basic way, it's about saying, if one researcher is looking at this particular data, do they apply the code in the same way as another researcher would apply the same code? And that's kind of fundamentally what it's about. So when we look at a piece of interview data, and I look at it and I say, oh yes, that's about problem solving, would Dr. Venny look at it and say, oh yes, that's about problem solving? We might, and we say yes. So Dr. Venny says, yes, that's about problem solving. And I say, yes, that's about problem solving. So tick, yes, we have inter-rater reliability. Another example might be where I look at an extract and I say, oh, that's about problem solving. But actually, Dr. Venny says, no, that's more about teacher authority. And so we would not be coding in the same way. So that would be a difference. So that would be a tick and an X. We're not saying that one is right and one is wrong. We're just saying that they're different. And over a series of codes, over a set of data, we can keep track of how much we agree. So how much do Dr. Vinny and I agree on these codes, and how much do we differ? And that tends to be where we're dealing with quite a lot of qualitative data, because obviously if we've got two researchers, that's a team of data, a team together. One of the what's also important about that is that normally before there is any coding, there is a training in how to use the codes beforehand. That's normal. If you're going to use that inter-rater reliability, there is a very explicit instruction on this is the code, this is the description, this is the code, this is the description. And normally you take a sample of a piece of data and you try it out together. And so that way it's a way, if you like, standardizing how the researcher codes. So normally when we talk about inter-rater reliability, there's normally a training phase with your raters, with your analysts, if you like.
Standard how many raters or coders to is there a standard or standard for how many coder or how many raters to conduct coding?
No. Again, it depends on the size of the project. Again, it depends on the amount of data, depends on the amount of, say, for example, variabilities. I'll give you one example from my own. We were involved in quite a large project across one nation, looking at over 50 schools. We had a great amount of data, and there were 6, 7, 8 people on the research team. And so we did exactly that. We had a coding manual, we conducted our training, we developed our codes in advance, we trained the group, and there were 3 of us. So out of a team of 8, there were 3 people who conducted that. So, but no, I think, more than one, more than one. There's no, and very often, again, much in the reporting, it's about, can you show that it wasn't just, 2 people looked at this and they agreed. It would be much better to report 2 people were trained in the coding system. Here are some examples where they miscode or their codes didn't align. Here's what we did to ensure that the codes did align. And then that shows you the rigor of the consistency of the coding. And that's kind of what it's about. So no, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any minimum number of inter-rater reliability. And sometimes you will get that whenever people are dealing with, say, maybe open questionnaires where there's quite a lot of data and people want to begin to then produce numbers based on the codes. I'm always slightly cautious about that. I'm very slightly cautious about people talking about codes as being, 10% of people interviewed said. I'm not sure that was the point of the interview to start with, and I think there are other ways to get that kind of 10% of people think, that's a questionnaire. That's definitely a questionnaire. From an interview, that's kind of, that doesn't get me my quality. So I hope that answers your question on inter-rater reliability.
Ibu Aisling,
yes.
Following Pak Jo questions, if we have multiple raters, can we classify that as a triangulation or not?
I personally, debatable. I wouldn't have called that triangulation, no. Okay. But you're going to tell me why you would. Why would you? I wouldn't have.
Because I triangulate my finding with someone else. So there are more than one person who perceive the answers. So I think I triangulate that based on different assessor or raters. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a way that you can, when we talked about number of data sources, some of the ways of helping to add rigor is to get a multiple number of analysts on it, on your data. And so, yeah, if you can describe carefully how that's triangulation, then that's okay. That's clear to do. That if it's the same data, I suppose that's, yeah. So, but that's possible to do, yeah. Okay. And triangulation tends to come from a more quantitative perspective as well. So that's yeah. So that's totally fine. That's okay. Brilliant, great. Okay, right. If are there any more questions? Can I move on? Because I know that time, and I want us to, okay, good. Vinny's saying yes, that's okay. Right. Okay. Just want to give you some just beginning to think about the reporting. So thinking about qualitative research publications, about reporting. There is always a literature review. It's okay. So, and it tends to be, it's really important because it sets up all of the concepts and the ideas and the perspectives that you are going to investigate in your paper. And for reasons as Dr. Erlina mentioned earlier, that's really important. It's really important that your literature review is a good, strong connection to what is in your discussion, okay? So that's really important. Yes, there are research questions. I think Dr. Vinny asked, are there research questions in quality research papers? And yes, there are. There is always a section on methods. There are always sections on findings and conclusions. So the fairly typical reporting macro structures, the big structures, the big elements of the textual, big textual structure elements are there for qualitative research. So I'll come back to that towards the end, but I would just want to just to kind of, I hopefully summarize, I hope what we've talked about so far. Just as an example, we looked at this Quail example of interviews, from thematizing down to designing, interview, transcribing, and analyzing, okay, verifying, and then reporting. If you're looking for more detail on which steps to follow and when, there is a really good sort of step-by-step process discussed in the book that I mentioned earlier, fairly standard text in the institution that I work in, on research methods and education. Cohen, Mannion, and Morrison, where they go through this 11-step process of analyzing content, so content analysis. So this could be used in interviews, it could be used if you have open questionnaires that you need to look at. It's quite, I think it's quite good because it goes through step by step, talking about defining your research questions, defining your data, defining the sample, defining the context, defining the units of analysis, deciding the codes, constructing the categories. And so it takes you through each of these particular steps, pretty much exemplifying what we've done and what I hope we will have enough time to do now in a moment as well. Okay. The reason why I've put it here like bread that becomes a little bit toasted and then even more toasted, it really is, as one of our colleagues mentioned before, how many times do you need to read this data? A lot. Okay, you do need to, it looks like this, and then you read it some more and it looks like this, and then you read it some more and it looks like this. So it's kind of, I'm probably all over the place with my metaphors, but please forgive me. But the idea is there that this is not something that one just does and it's done. It very much changes and is a staged pattern. Okay, right. Okay, I want to have a little bit of I hope you'll be okay, but this is a bit of I'm hoping it's going to be a bit of a game, but we'll see how it goes. Can you remember from session 1, our classroom interaction data? It was about how chemistry teachers deal with students who give wrong answers. Do you remember? Is everybody with you? Do you remember that? I see Vinny nodding. And yeah, okay, great. Vinny, I'm taking you as my marker of everything. So, and remember, we'd looked at a couple of extracts here, and I think it was we were saying, oh my goodness, they were talking about titration. Is that right? I'm just gonna, yeah, I'll just take that as yes, right? And we were looking at how do chemistry teachers respond to students who give wrong answers or incorrect answers in oral interaction in classrooms. Okay, if you remember, that's what it was about. There were 3 teachers who were involved. The teaching context where classes were recorded and transcribed. You'll see here, they were analysed interpretively. So very often that's the kind of the general term for that. Okay, so I'm hoping you remember this. Now, one of the things, again, thinking about how this was reported, this paper gives us much more detail on how the data was analysed. Okay, so I want to give you sort of 2 different examples, one where it was very scantily presented, and here where there's quite a lot of detail about how the analysis was conducted. So here, and it helps us with what Dr. Joe said about inter-rater reliability and what Vinny was talking about there. So in relation to the interview data, you see we mentioned this before, so we refers to both the authors here. So we separately read and reread each teacher's individual responses to the interview questions. Okay, so separately, the 2 researchers read and then reread each of the teachers, so there were 3 teachers, the responses. Okay, independently, on their own, they independently constructed understandings of the different ways teachers claimed to react or act in situations where students give the wrong answer. Okay, so 2 people. So again, it's talking about that the idea of having multiple eyes, multiple people looking at the data. Then later, okay, so this is the process, compared our constructions for a common understanding. Okay, now that I think is a much clearer, much more transparent explanation of the data analysis process than was in the other paper. Okay, it's all very clear, it's all very, concise. I might ask that there would be more information about what areas did they disagree on, or what areas did they not include, but that's perhaps a little more detail that we needed. Okay, all right, so that gives you an example of how to analyze in a much more clearer way than the other than the earlier one. Okay. Again, this is extracts directly from the paper. So this is given directly in the paper. So much more information about the process. So starting with the first interview, okay, and they go on to say what they did. We identified 4 ways in which the teacher claimed to react during questioning, can't read that, questioning situations involving when students asked the incorrect. Okay, so from the 2 researchers, they read the interviews individually, they reread them, individually they came up with 4 codes, if you like, they came up with 4 categories, they spoke to each other, they compared what it was, they compared their answers, and then this is what they agreed on. Now, it may be that one researcher had 3 codes and one researcher had 5 codes, and they came together and saw, actually, my 3rd code is actually can be broken into 2, or that part of it we're kind of missing here, but for now there's enough information here. And so they are presenting what they have produced at the end of that analysis. So based on the interviews, the teachers either they say they remain neutral, they repeat the initial question, they clarify with question, or they privately talk to the student. Okay, so that's what they're saying. These claims from the first interview data set that we analysed served as our reference categories when analysing the remaining interviews. Okay, so the first set of interviews, that's what came out, that 4-code analysis framework, and they then use that 4-code analysis framework with all of the other interviews. Okay, so here you see the same procedure was repeated for all the interviews while paying attention to any different practices that had not been captured before. That goes back to Dr. Erlina's point about what do you do about the other category, and that's where that you pay attention to what's doesn't make it into the particular code. Okay, I'm moving on a bit now, if that's okay. So that was the teacher's self-beliefs. So based on the data from the teacher's self-beliefs, the researchers came up with 4 categories. Okay. However, based on the observational data, which was the recordings of the classrooms, they came up with 8, I think it's 8, yeah, it's about 8 other categories different from the 4 that had been produced. Now, oops, although it isn't said anywhere within this paper, having set up the interview analysis as such, one assumes that the same process was adopted for the rest of the qualitative data. So there would have been people looking at them independently, coming together, sharing where there was similarities, discussing where there were any differences in the categorizations. Okay, so with a different set of data, they came up with these 8 categories: ignoring students, etc., etc. Now, what I want you to do, if it's okay, is we've got 4 extracts here. So these are 4 examples. Sorry, these are 4 extracts from the classroom interactions, okay? So this first one in the orange box, the teacher asks, where can we apply decantation in our lives? The student says, insult making. Teacher says, insult making, yes, but not so clear. Changes direction and looks at other students. Yes, John. Okay. So remember we talked about earlier about the extra contextual information sometimes being in brackets. Okay. So the teacher changes direction and looks to other students. All right. And she goes on to ask student number 2. Okay. Now, my question that I want to ask is, can we together, can we map up these different categories with these examples? Whoops. Okay, so if we think about this first example, what is the teacher asks a question, the student answers. What does the teacher do with the answer? What's the teacher doing there? Anybody?
Can you say ignore? Ignore.
Yeah, kind of ignoring, isn't it? Yeah. So
Okay.
yes. So ignoring. So the student says insult making, and the teacher says insult making, yes, but not so clear, and changes direction and walks away. Imagine being, yeah. Imagine being the student. The student doesn't know, is insult making, yes, but not so clear. Yes, but no. So what is it? So the student is really left quite confused. But yes, it is, and that is what they described. Whoops, sorry, as ignoring students. They coded that together. The teachers coded that, categorized it as ignoring students' views. Okay. What about this one in the blue? What could we say about this one in the blue? So the teacher says, what are those solutions? How do we call them? Which solution? The student says standard solution. The teacher then says, and we might interpret that as, Teacher surprised by student response, disapproves by changing a facial expression to unhappy. Teacher then says, stand. Sorry, go ahead.
Humiliation.
Sorry, Dr. Ira, could you say that again?
Humiliation. Like
Humiliation, I think, yeah.
có thể menghina gitu ya.
Okay.
Humiliation.
Can we go back to the teams?
Yeah, back to the themes. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
Back to
sorry.
the teams.
Yeah.
It exposes students lack of knowledge.
Yeah, lack of knowledge, I think, or
Yeah. I mean, this is really interesting. What we are doing now is what the researchers will have done. There on my screen, I've got 2 or 3 people. I'm sorry, I haven't got everybody, but we're all thinking about what is that? What's the teacher doing there? Are they angry? Are they exposing the students' lack of knowledge? What do they do? You know, that's are they punishing the student?
oh yeah.
You know, so absolutely. So we can look and sort of,
Okay, to surprise the students, the changing, happy, maybe angry.
Yeah.
yeah.
Stand.
Quite.
The word stand. Stand. It's a punishment.
That's right. It's a punishment, isn't it? Yes, it's a punishment. Mhm. Okay, what about this one in the green? I won't read that because there are words there I don't know how to pronounce.
I think reject students feel.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's rejecting, very rejecting. So the student says something, and if you have a look there, the student says, student 2 says, can produce high concentration of what? Solution? Of solution. Okay, high voice, shaking head. Okay, this is, I'm not liking the science class at the moment, but you know, it might change, it might differ. But yeah, absolutely. That's what so how these researchers, they did exactly as we're doing now. We talk about and look and see, well, what is the evidence for this to be coded as angry? What's the evidence for this to be coded as rejecting and being frustrated, perhaps? And so that's the process through which the researchers will have looked at this data. What's going on here? How could we categorize this instance? What is this an instance of? Okay, and that's what we look at when we're looking through observational data. What is this an instance of? Is this an instance of teachers responding with a follow-up question? Is it an example of students, teachers being supportive of students? You know, that's what we want to.
This
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, authoritative teachers like me.
Absolutely. Oh dear.
Oh, no, no,
There's
no.
oh dear, there's some admissions there by Dr. Benny. Okay, but you can see, you know, this is the process that what we're doing, and it might be that we need some time to think about it. So going again to our previous discussion, how many times do we need to read this? Well, you know, read it a few times, because you need to think, is that rejecting it, the student outright, or are they ignoring them? And these are some examples of categories. Okay, what about some more? These are slightly more positive, I have to say. I just want to, you know, show, you know, the good and bad that happens in classrooms. We know that classrooms are places where good things and not so good things happen. So what's happening here? What's this teacher doing in the red? The teacher says, where can we apply decantation in our lives? Student says, at home. Teacher says, how? At home. Have you your reference material there? The teacher abandons the student and takes on another for the desired response. So what's happening there? Well, there's a little bit of trying here, isn't there? There's a little bit of trying to say at home. How at home? Come on, give us some more. So it might be the wrong answer, but oh, come on, try a little bit. But unfortunately, there's no time here for the student to respond. Straight away, you have your reference material there. Go look it up. That's basically the answer there, isn't it? It's, you've given me an answer I'm not happy with. Go look up the answer is kind of what's happening here. So what about this one in the blue? What do we think about this one in the blue? So the teacher says, can you mention human activities that can pollute land? The student says agriculture. The teacher says, how come agriculture can be a land pollution? And the student says the use of fertilizer. What's happening here?
Is a follow-up.
Yeah, it's absolute. It's an absolute follow-up. Yep, it's a follow-up. It's pushing the student to be more specific, and actually, the teacher has to rephrase their question to make it more specific. You know, really. Now, this is lovely. This is the kind of classroom you want. You don't really want another classroom. This is it. You know, you're pushing the knowledge of the student, but doing it in a way that is supportive to them. Okay. What about this yellow one? The one in yellow. So the teacher says, assume you are doing titration. How will you know what the hydrochloric acid have reacted completely with sodium hydroxide? How will you know? Teachers, or students' moments of silence. The teacher then changes the question. Do you remember hydrochloric? I suppose it's. Do you remember what hydrochloric acid is? Okay. Again, what's that?
The moment of silence is just like our condition now.
I know. I know. And I'm really hoping.
Yeah, this is a really example.
Yeah. And I'm really hoping I'm like the nice, good teacher who does like lots of follow-up questions or rephrasing. And that's, that's what if we look at what's happening here, look at the first question that the teacher asks, look at the second question, what have they done in that Hello?
Ibu Ira, you want to say something?
Menggali informasi lagi gitu kayak apa ya?
Ibu Ira said perhaps the teacher asked the students to take more information about that. I mean, try to attract students to have another
to attract
answers. Yeah,
to motivate. Okay, come on.
Okay, come on, you
can do it. Come on, something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really, this is really good. And it's something that, that we do. Do you remember hydrochloric acid? It's not what is hydrochloric acid? Define it's not that. It's going, do you remember? Remember you've done this before? Absolutely. It is very motivating and it's relationship building, isn't it? That's what's here. But yes, very plainly, it's rephrasing the question, isn't it? It's changing the question a little bit to try and
make it different, right? But
make it different. Break it down. Do it.
Yeah.
Break it down. Okay. All right. So what about our green example here? So which are the pollutants here? There? Dirty water. Dirty water. Teachers show signs of being annoyed with the unsatisfying response. We don't. Okay. And the student. What does the student do? Dirty water is used to wash those minerals. So it is contaminated with those minerals. Okay. So what happens there?
Contaminated with those minerals. So the teacher angry here or what?
The teacher does. Well, it's interesting here in how it's transcribed. Rather than saying the teacher is angry and frustrated and walks away, it's not that. He or she shows signs of being annoyed with the unsatisfying response. It must not be very angry because the student is giving it another go. The student is trying again, so it must not be that angry, one assumes. The student, what actually happens is that the student does produce more of an answer, which is a good thing. But then the teacher, what does the teacher do? So the student says dirty water is used to wash those minerals, and the teacher says,
it's like teasing, teasing the student's answer.
It's what? Sorry, say that again, Vinny.
Teasing the student's answer.
Yes, it is. It is very much trying to get more from the student, trying to get stuff out of this out. But they're also feeding in some words that the students might need, supplementing. So trying to connect for the student. The student is trying to get the connection in words between pollutant and dirty water and minerals. So the teacher then tries to put those all together to give an answer back based on what the student has said. So it's almost like the teacher is saying, so let me explain what you mean. It's the water is contaminated with the minerals. Okay, and that's that process that we've gone through. That's, I think, what's really good sometimes about qualitative research is looking at things together, talking about things, and then making as good an interpretation as we can. We're never going to be saying that it is 100% the correct answer. And that's really important to remember. We are only ever making as best an interpretation as we can. And we're always open to discussion about that. But at some point we have to, draw a line and say, no, our interpretation of this instance is that it is about teacher providing supplementary answers to the student's question, or supporting them, or building or rephrasing their answer for them. Okay. And yes, all of those, there's no guesswork here. This is all straight from the paper. So well done us that we got all of those. We matched those categories over onto the particular categories that the researchers did. But in a very short example, we did exactly what they did with their data, okay? And that's what I mean, there's no big mystery. There's no secret formula to qualitative research. It's looking, it's reading, and it's interpreting. We have the beauty of having a great number of colleagues here to talk with, and that's really good also. And we can do that through, colleagues, inter-rater reliability, supervisors, we can do that, and that's possible to do. Okay, just to show you again, in the reporting of qualitative research, you do sometimes get, as well as the extracts like this, where these extracts are presented, there is often a summary diagram or an attempt in some figure or diagrammatic form to show some of the connections and to show some of the discussion of the findings. And so in this paper that we've looked at on the chemistry teachers and their answers to, or how they deal with answers to incorrect questions, this is what the researchers produced. Okay, so based on their analysis, they produced two, if you like, they grouped the codes into authoritative teaching and more into dialogic teaching, and were able then to make this diagram. And that is, it does tend to be a feature of qualitative research reporting. Okay, all right. Any questions? Yes, Dr. Joe, I see a hand.
Okay. What is the type of this qualitative study? Is that a case study or just a qualitative study? For
this one, I think,
yeah.
this one states it's just qualitative research.
Just qualitative study.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Okay, all right. Any questions? Oh, there's another chat there. Have I missed chats? Okay, right. Okay, now just to, I know that Benny will be scolding me in a minute because we've not got very many minutes left, but I just want to point out something about qualitative research papers and publications. Okay, part of my reason for structuring all of these sessions around examples from published qualitative research is that so we can become, and you can become, familiar with reading qualitative research, being able to pull out of qualitative research what the particular features are that are important. And I think one of the best ways of getting to understand the kind of textual structure of qualitative research is to read papers. Okay, have access to papers and read papers. Not all of them will be good. Not all of them will be good examples, and I think we need to be really clear and state that from the start. But there are some good examples, and I hope I've shown you a good example and maybe one that could be improved. Okay, I don't have any connections with any of these authors. That's the other thing is just to say as well. But when we are thinking about structuring an article, you're sitting down to write up the research that you've conducted. So we talk about research reporting. So consistent across any qualitative research paper will be a thorough presentation of literature. So the literature review. Now, this just isn't here's what Joan says, here's what Carolina says. It's much more intensive than just reporting of research. Okay. Within the literature review, that's the area where you are really setting up the key concepts, the key ideas that your research is going to answer. Okay, so it's not just a chronological or historical presentation of, or this work was conducted and they showed this work was conducted and they reported this. It's not that. That tends to be at a very descriptive level, which isn't helpful. It isn't helpful because it won't connect well with your analysis and your discussion. Okay, so that's, I suppose, one of the things to say that might be a bit different in a literature review in relation to qualitative research versus one in relation to quantitative research. It is really important in your literature review that you create an argument, that you make very clear what the point of your work is and why it's important, right? That is really important. And what your research is going to find out that will contribute to this particular concept or theory that you're looking at. It will have research questions. Okay, that's the sometimes there's this misconception that qualitative research doesn't have research questions. It does, and it states them clearly in the reporting of the paper. Methods. Okay, so here, can I give you 2 examples? So this paper, these are, I did a sort of very basic text structure analysis of the 2 papers that we've looked at today. This one was about the assessment framework, and this one was about the chemistry teachers answering incorrect questions. Okay, in relation to the method, the information that was given was participants and the research context and the data sources. In this method, okay, in this method of this paper, they most certainly did talk about their approach. They also gave details on their participants and the setting. They listed through the data sources, and they also provided a discussion of how they went about their data analysis. Okay, so my advice, suggestion would be try to follow this kind of a method rather than this kind of a method. Okay, in terms of reporting, these are subtitles for reporting. So don't leave out, you know, here are my methods, and you know, here I interviewed 10 people and I used semi-structured interviews, and then you go to results and findings. That's not enough. You need to say a bit more in your methods. Okay, explain what the data sources are, and also say something about your process of analyzing. Okay, now research, research in terms of findings. In this paper, it's listed as findings. In the second paper, it's listed as results and discussion. I think you'll find that this is probably the most preferred option when talking about qualitative research, results and discussion. Discussion needs to happen in qualitative research because you need to very clearly communicate your interpretation of the results to the researcher or to the audience. Okay, so that is why the discussion is incredibly important. When you look at this paper yourselves, and I hope that you do, you will see that they explain each one of those 8 categories that we've looked at. They explain what they are, and they give 2 examples. We looked at 1 example, and they give 2 examples of each of those categories. And they explain clearly what they mean and how they have interpreted them. So that's really important, because part of the results and the discussion is making your interpretation of the data analysis very clear. So we talked about that, transparent, but also trying to make it convincing. Okay, trying to convince the reader, I did this analysis this way and it was very successful because it gave me answers to my research questions. Okay, in all sections, you will, in papers, there will be the conclusions sections. Okay, you will find more recently implications and conclusions. So it is, as we live in the world that we live in 2022, it is really important that our research can make an impact and can make a difference to the contexts and to the concepts that we work with and that we live in. So it is important, and I would stress this, it is important to spell out what the implications of your research are. So it's not just good enough to write a summary and make a conclusion. You need to very clearly spell out what are the implications of your work for teachers, for students, for parents, for policymakers, for whoever. And I think that's really important to do. And sometimes that's where it's important in a journal publication that you very forcefully spell out why this paper is important and why this paper needs to be published in that journal. And very often it's here that you can help to persuade the reviewers to go, oh yes, we need to publish this. Okay, so that's really where we are with those. So I suppose in summary around the structures, they're not hugely different. The structure of reporting in qualitative research is not hugely different from that of quantitative research or other research methods, but there are aspects that need to be paid more attention to, particularly around, say, for example, your data analysis, and particularly around the discussion of your results and what they mean. Okay, all right. Just as I conclude, as I know that we're kind of a minute to go, just as a big, huge reminder that qualitative research, no matter how you do it, no matter where you do it, no matter who you do it with, is always about understanding people's experiences. Okay, and I hope that the examples that we've looked through there has prioritized the notion that we want to find out about people's experiences. And we also want to find out about their meanings that they attach to the things that happen in their lives. So, you know, by answering questions in a certain way, are we being authoritative? Are we being dialogic? Is it good teaching? Is it not so good teaching? Okay. And I suppose above all, I think what qualitative research really does, and what you, I think, will hopefully really do, is to build a better understanding of the phenomenon that you're looking at. You're not testing a hypothesis. Okay, in qualitative research, you're not testing a hypothesis. You are building an understanding of a particular phenomenon, whatever that phenomenon is, whether it's classroom assessment practices, whether it's how science teachers reply to students, whatever that phenomenon is, you're building a better understanding of that, and you're doing it through interpreting meaning and experiences. Okay, so I suppose I'll stop there. I'll say thank you very much, most sincerely, Dr. Venny, for inviting me along, and I apologize for all of the mistakes that I've made with the times and the dates and sickness and everything like that. So I very much apologize for that. I wish you most sincerely good luck with your research. I'm really happy to answer any questions now or later if you want to send an email or if you want to contact Dr. Venny or whatever. I'm very happy. I'm just absolutely delighted to have spent some time with you. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aisling. Everyone, please give applause to Dr. Aisling. This is very informative, and I feel like, you know, we have 3 sessions of qualitative research. It's really like it is compact in 3 meetings, and you describe from the beginning till the end. So this is really beneficial for us. Dr. Aisling, if you one day come to Indonesia, please contact us. Let us know.
I will.
Yeah,
oh, I will.
Perhaps you go to Jakarta, perhaps, and then we will contact our dean, perhaps to invite you to come to our hometown here in Pontianak.
I would love to.
Ibu Aisling, some of our colleges are still master graduates. Perhaps they will apply for the scholarship from Indonesian government. Is it okay if they want to apply you as their supervisor? They can contact you via email?
Yes, they can contact me via email. I might not be in their area. So their specific area. I know nothing of chemistry, as I'm sure I have clearly demonstrated.
Yes,
I clearly have demonstrated. But yes, absolutely. And often what I can and I can very happy if it's me. Very happy for to be a supervisor, or if there's another colleague in my department who maybe has more expertise in that particular area, I'm very happy to make introductions. So yes, no, absolutely happy to do that.
And right. Some of our colleges have finished their doctorate degree. Perhaps they want to apply for postdoc program or visiting scholar, making use of the fee of funding from the government, Indonesian government. Can they send email to you asking you to be their supervisor during visiting scholar program?
Yes, okay. Very happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aisling, for your kindness. Perhaps, Dr. Aisling, because you are the director of international relations, is that right?
Internationalization for the school.
Okay.
Which is actually a role I've just stopped and someone else is doing.
Okay.
But I'm happy to pass on. Yep, I'm happy to pass on. Yep.
we would be very grateful if you can come to Pontianak, like for example introduce Queen's University Belfast to some lectures here. We would be very excited to have you, to see you directly, and then you maybe explain about the proposal, how to write a proposal for doctorate program for doctorate students. Perhaps maybe later we can contact you later discussing about this.
Yeah, discussion.
Very happy to do that. Yeah, very happy to do that. I've always with COVID, before COVID, I was planning to go to Indonesia. After COVID, I know we're all in different places or different situations, but very much so. If I have an opportunity to go to Indonesia, I'm very, very, very happy to come to visit you in Kalimantan. Very happy to.
Thank you, Dr. Aisley. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our sessions. We have already finished 3 sessions in a row with Dr. Aisley. Perhaps the operator wants to take the picture. Could you turn on the camera, everyone, please? This is for, sweet memories with Dr. Aisley. Thank you so much for your explanations. Thank you so much also for the participants, for your participations, for your active participations. This is the end of our sessions. I think we can close this because we are going to have a prayer. Thank you so much, Dr. Aisley. It's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for your help.
Thank you. Take
Bye,
care,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Aisley. See you
Very
next
welcome.
time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley. Please come to Pontianak.
See you, Erlina.
You, bye.
Akhirnya kita ketemu juga. Walaupun secara online.
Iya,
Jadi
oke.
jam 3 subuh.
Sampai jam 3 subuh. Oke, bye.
Bye.
Wassalamualaikum. Ya, oke. Assalamualaikum.